Hello, welcome to Tuesday, October 20th daily instructional video. Today we're going to be going over Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Okay, so for your warm-up, you will need to define your vocabulary words, which are located on page 165 through 168 in the book. You go to your Google form and write in those definitions, and that will be your warm-up for the day. We will do a reading check quiz and see that you're keeping up with the reading, and you should have already read and annotated the speech, and we're going to go over and look at some more rhetorical devices within the speech. So go ahead and pause the video and define your words. Okay, so prosperity, you've probably heard this. We had the bank in Dayton called Prosperity Bank. It means good fortune and success. Hallowed, you might hear that actually around Halloween time. It's a holy or sacred place. Tribulations, you may have heard that phrase used with trials and tribulations, means trouble or misery. Redemptive, you've probably can associate it with being to redeem, which means to redeem yourself, to serving to deliver from sorrow, make amends, or payback. Oppression, you probably heard this term a lot in history, cruel or unjust treatment. And exalted means to be elevated or to raise up high. So you have a Google form to complete for a pop quiz. Your questions are: Dr. King is standing in the shadow of what great American? 2, in the speech, King urges our nation to make these fundamental changes. When does he want these changes made? How many years is 50 years? Name one historical document that King mentions or alludes to in his speech. And 5, in the paragraph that begins with the now famous I Have a Dream, King mentions members of his own family. Which family members does he mention? This is a very famous line, so if that helps you remember. So go ahead and pause the video and go complete your Google form and take your pop quiz. Okay, so some things that we are going to go over, some rhetorical devices. We have already done parallelism, where we're looking at the same grammatical structure, arrangement of words being used. Repetition is the use of the same word over and over. So we got here happy, happy, happy. Charged language are dramatic words that appeal to listeners' emotion. They're very powerful. Analogy is something new, and it's in the comparison, which you might think it's a simile or a metaphor, but it's also it goes beyond just being a simile or a metaphor. Analogies are used to make logical comparisons, so it appeals to your your logos. So climate is like a person's personality. So you can hear the simile right there and see the simile, but it goes beyond that to explain the comparison. It is mostly consistent and predictable. Weather, however, is like a person's mood. It might fluctuate day to day. So you see the simile, or you can see its metaphor whenever you write a metaphor, but it goes beyond and extends it and explains it for logical reasoning, and that would be an analogy. And then, of course, rhetorical questions are those questions that are no responses needed. There's an obvious answer. There's just there to prove a point. Some background for the speech: Martin Luther King was a prominent leader of the civil rights movement from 55 to 68. He was assassinated in 68. He gave this iconic speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. And there was around 250,000 people who attended this speech. This was a march on Washington, also known as the March for Jobs and Freedom. And he was the last speaker of this protest, and there was still quite a few people all the way to the end. You know how like sometimes at concerts or games or things like that, towards the end people start to leave, and of course some people did, but it stayed pretty packed and crowded for everyone wanted to hear King's speech. Some cross-curricular perspectives. On January 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. As you notice, it's 1963 when he gave the speech, and the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863. So it's been in 100 years at the time of the speech since the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slavery. Also, when Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address, he starts it off with 7 years ago, which it's also reminiscent to King's speech, where he starts off talking about 50 ago, which is 100 years, making reference to the Emancipation. So he mimics and models Abraham Lincoln's speech to his own speech. All right, we're going to look at paragraph 3 and underline the examples of parallelism and circle charge language. Okay, so I have a lot of notes in here, but in paragraph 3, we can see, but 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, life for the Negroes is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the change of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro's life is a lonely island in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile on his own island or own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. So you can see the parallelism here with this grammatical structure. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is, and then he follows with his statement. So we see that same phrase being repeated in talking about different things. That's our parallelism. Look at the charged language that he uses: crippled by the manacles, island of poverty. So instead of saying where the poor lives in poverty, he says an island to show the desolation of it, and the material or prosperity. So instead of saying wealthy people, he's really doing a great job of comparing and making a connection for the reader. Languished and exile on his own, shameful conditions. As you can see, the diction, the word choice, the diction goes on with such charged language: seared into flames, withering injustice. So he does a great job with that. All right. What is insufficient funds? And what does this term symbolize in this speech? All right, so let's go. So he talks about here in paragraph 4, in a sense, we come to our nation's capital to cash a check. So when the architects of the Republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which America was to fall heir. So here I have highlighted pink. These are allusions that he's making references to. When he talks about this cash a check, this promissory note, if you look up what promissory note means, is a written promise to pay a specific amount. So when we write checks, you're writing down an amount that you are saying that you can pay because you have this money in the bank. Maybe not many people use checks now. They may use more like debit cards, but whenever you swipe that debit card, you're promising that you have the money in the bank to pay for this, whatever it is that you're receiving. So he's saying here that Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, that was our check that America wrote, that every man, both, like he says here, yes, black and white, were both guaranteed those unalienable rights. Those are rights that cannot be taken away, of liberty, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that's the check. That's the promise they made. But America has, because of the way African Americans have been treated, that America has defaulted on that check and has insufficient funds, which means there's no money in the bank. There's nothing to back up that promise that America made because of the way they've been treated. Okay. So, sorry. What does the term symbolize in a speech? So that insufficient funds is going to symbolize the racism, the inequality, the injustice that's happening. Paragraph 6 and 7, it says identify sentences that present two highly contrasting or opposing images. What do these images suggest about the speaker's view in both the present and the future, and how does these images add urgency to the speaker's message? All right, so in paragraph 6 and 7, if we start right here, now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. If you notice those images, the dark valley to the sunlit path. So he's referring to where we are in the present. That's the dark valley that we're in right now. We're dealing with segregation. But there's hope into the future. There's a path that we can see a light of racial justice instead of injustice. He talks about the quicksands of radical injustice. Think about quicksand, what it does. It pulls you down. But what would help save you from that? Being on top of a solid rock, the rock of brotherhood. So again, the quicksands of radical injustice would be the present, and the solid rock of brotherhood would be the present, will be the future, is what we're striving for. Here in paragraph 7, this is sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there's an invigorating autumn of freedom. So we have summer and autumn, the comparisons there. Again, summer, sweltering, what they're dealing with right now, and then the autumn is the hopeful future of what they plan to have, the freedom and equality. Okay, and how do these images and urgency add urgency to the message? Because he wants them to happen, even though this is our current situation. He's expecting them to happen immediately. So paragraphs 1 through 6 share a similar theme of what's called broken promises. Can you come up with any kind of other words or phrases to identify paragraphs 1 through 6 as a common theme? Think about that. So in paragraph 8 and 9, King speaks to his people. Who are his people, and what is he speaking of his, and what is he asking of his people? All right, but there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads us into a palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. So he's talking about the people the African American people who are there with him fighting for justice. And he's warning them here that, let's not lower ourselves. Let's make sure that we are not guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not satisfy our thirst for freedom from the cup of bitterness and hatred. So even though we are treated poorly and terrible, we're not going to be bitter about it. We're not going to, what he's trying to prevent is there to be violence. He's always been about taking care of this justice and getting equality through nonviolent means. He's gone through laws, he's gone to politicians. He doesn't want the people who protest to lower themselves and get caught up in the bitterness of hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high planes of dignity and discipline. So again, putting ourselves in a better place, we're not lowering our standards. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the magnificent heights of the meeting of physical force with soul force. So again, using our words, using our passion, but not using our fist or using violence. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up in our destiny. There's some parallelism there. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricable bound to our freedom. So here again, we have parallelism. Okay, so that is all that we're going to do today. We will pick up, you can go ahead and read paragraphs 10, 11, and 12, and then we're going to pick up with the rest of the speech tomorrow. You have this worksheet to work on. Make sure, like in the boxes that are green, you just click on there and type in your answer. These have a little star just to show that you can type. You can whichever answer choice you choose. You should be able to answer most of these. So on the land, yeah, you should be able to at least do the front page, and then tomorrow you could do the back, or you could do it all. It's up to you. This is going to go into paragraph 10, 11, and 12, and I'll discuss these with you tomorrow. But tonight you should be able to at least do this, and then tomorrow night you could do this and then turn it in. It's not due, I believe, until Thursday. I believe it's Thursday, and on Thursday we'll have a little other activity to do. And Friday, we're going to have a test over the speech. So if you have any questions, tomorrow I'll have my Google Meets from 11 to 11:30 and 2:50 to 3:20. If you have any questions about grades or anything, I will gladly speak to you through email, one-on-one meets if you want. I did not get to update grades this weekend because the school decided to do something with Skyward, and it was down all weekend, and no teachers were able to update their grades. So I'll be working really hard trying to get those all finalized. But if you're failing, please reach out to me. I think a couple of you did try to reach out to me, but I couldn't respond since I didn't know what your grade was and situation. So if I don't respond to your email, make sure you email me again just in case. Again, hope y'all have a great day. If you have any questions, please let me know.